So the rabbi's advice to someone like your father or your mother?
But my rabbi told me when my father got sick, he said it's the greatest blessing for me that my father got sick. Because he said the guy could have been strong and you could have been terrified of him and then he would just drop dead. You got to see God disarming somebody. And that, like, you must have merited to be able to witness God taking somebody that's so scary and powerful. And like when I stand in front of my dad these days, I'm like, you can't hurt me. How is driven identity model different than any other human being? Technically, every human being should go through this model of getting into their higher self.
Yeah, this is all how all human beings work. Drivens have to learn this, otherwise the model that they're using of lowercase self is too destructive.
Would you say that regular humans tend to naturally live in a higher self, or their life is less effective if they live in a lower self? Because I think, as we spoke about, sheep live in a lower self. So you would say 90% of the world lives in a lower self, but they don't have that power, so they don't end up that destructive.
They live by a narrative in their head that keeps them safe. And as long as they subscribe to the narrative and live by it, they are safe. They follow the rules. As long as their environment don't rapidly change, and the rules are consistent.
So that means that they're living in the lower self space, but it's a safe place for them to be because they don't have that gene and that whatever is pushing them to go and do big things. Like those are the people that come home and watch TV every night, have a 9 to 5 job, and they're satisfied.
Netflix, Chick-fil-A, they're good.
Correct.
They aren't constantly questioning everything. And it's largely because they have a default modal network on their brain that as long as they subscribe to the narrative they're living to, they never have to question their emotional truth. Subscribe to the original sin very easily. They believe they know good from evil. I know good from evil. It's evil to not wear a mask. Therefore, wear your mask. Otherwise, you are evil.
Okay, so normal person is happy with what they have, family of 16, why does one child go, and why are they different? And that is a combination of nature and nurture.
Everything's a combination of nature and nurture.
D2, D4 gene could be the whole family has the gene, but then this child, some kind of trauma happened in their life.
Or not. Could have been their parents' trauma, could have been their grandparents' trauma, could have been their great-great-great-great-grandparents' trauma. But it propelled them to have a combination of both a different reward system and they have a different neurological structure. So we feel like there's always something missing or wrong, and we have a default modal network in our brain that keeps us from creating a narrative that ever suffices and taking away that emotion.
I see it so strongly. Like we're moving into the house and I'm so proud of everything I'm doing. And my husband walks in, he's like, why is it like this? And we could have done this. And I'm exhausted. I'm like, Ezra, we spent so much money. Can we just like appreciate what we have and not talk about the pool and the landscaping and all the things that we didn't do and we want to do and we're gonna do? He's like, as a driven entrepreneur, I can only appreciate 5 minutes before I reach the goal and 2 minutes after, because then I've already moved it.
Feelings aren't facts.
No, it's just fascinating because like we had an argument a year ago. It was my son's birthday, and I felt so proud that I got him yellow cupcakes because my son loves the color yellow. And I brought it home, and my husband was just so adamant why it didn't have sprinkles. And I'm like, could you just look at the fact that I'm a hero and I brought home yellow cupcakes?
My father is, yeah, but the service was slow and the portions were small. I mean, it's a classic same old,
Yeah.
The food was good, but
The cause of all evil. And then he was getting ready for his 2-day annual today. And he called me with like the whole narrative of what he's gonna say in his check-in. And I was like, Ezra, like, why does there have to be a narrative? Like, why can't you walk in with an open mind and curiosity and see what's gonna happen? And he's like, because really, I want to have intense conversations. I want people to argue. And I'm like, you're driven. You love arguments. Those people don't. Like, you're walking in there and saying, come on, let's argue. Like, you're driving everybody away.
And you see this, well, sheep are probably the easier ones to see it in, how they bond together based upon their collective narrative.
Yes.
And so no one ever questions that collective narrative within that. If they are, they're canceled and kicked out.
Right.
We're drivens, we don't believe in any collective narrative.
We're able to see what I call nuance. When people want to fight and they're like right
You
or
heard that?
left.
Did you see that meme? Nuance is the new N word.
Well, it's true because when people start arguing with me, I'm like, I always say it depends. Somebody today was like, oh, sunscreen is bad for you. Okay, but too much sun isn't good either. And hey, like, it's not a blanket statement.
Because we know there is no ultimate truth except for God.
Right.
And because we don't have God's eyes and we can't see everything, we can't see the good in everything. And so you're always questioning, well, there's good in it, guaranteed, because it's godly, but it's humility.
Okay, so we understand the foundation.
That is a rare quality.
Understanding nuance.
I don't know how rare, because the research I'm going to is Phil Zimbardo was a guest lecturer at USC when I was there in 1987, 88. He ran the Stanford Prison Studies. And Stanford Prison Studies was randomly bring in a bunch of college students. You're going to be prisoners and you're going to be guards. Within 3 days, he kept having to cancel the study because the prisoners got too violent and mean.
And they weren't even real prisoners.
The guards were I mean, just how quickly we fall into narratives is,
and how much we take advantage of authority.
And authority. That's
People love power and authority.
Milgram studies. The Milgram studies, another one at that same 1950s, coming out of World War II, about how to get Germans to run fucking extermination camps, and it's the guy in the white lab coat,
right,
telling the subject to continue to administer the teacher, keep doing the shock. 2/3 of all human beings, and that study was repeated beyond ad nauseum, 2/3 of people will blindly follow authority to kill someone else.
Wow.
Third of us that don't.
Right. And it's crazy because I've always butted heads with like doctors about my kids. So I have an outline of a book sitting that I never did anything with it. And the title is going to be somewhere around trusted advisor. And it's because I've seen so many coaches, doctors, lawyers, and then the consumer side. It's like, okay, you need a doctor. Great. So you're now the helpless person. How do you trust that doctor? So I wrote out, like, I fleshed out like 5 things of a process to follow, of like, they must tell you what the end is going to look like, so, go to a therapist. They don't, if their therapist can't tell you, okay, what's the end result? What's the goal? Then they're not good. They have to be willing to work themselves out of a job. I haven't looked at it in forever, but it's going to turn into a book one day.
It's good advice. But most people have the luxury of not having to really examine their lives.
Well, when they end up spending a ton of money at the wrong people, even marketing people, like, I'm seeing it over and over again. So I take that filter and I put it through situations I've seen. I could show you where it went wrong. We hired a marketing agency, spent $200,000 on it. I could show you where it went wrong, and it's this ordinary, and my last one is ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So when somebody does something because they want to look good versus having your best interests in mind.
Tell me more about, why do you think power is so addicting? What is it about that quality that turns good people?
That's a very powerful question. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about my dad. I hate to say this, but he most probably would have been diagnosed with some kind of sociopathic thing, because he enjoyed seeing people suffer, even his own kids. And I always wondered, how could a human being enjoy?
He's masochistic. I mean, he really, what do you mean he enjoys it?
He'd lock out my sister and he would be totally cool with it, go to sleep. Like, he would set up situations where he knew you're gonna fail and he would be okay with it. He loved picking fights. He would fight with cab drivers in the middle of the FDR, stop his car and flip a finger. It's like, why? And when you think about somebody that's a child of a Holocaust survivor that has sadism in them, I always question why. And I think it gave him a certain power and safety that he lost as a child.
Safety. What is the safety?
His traumas, his parents, like his dad left him when he was 12. So he became the adult very early on. He's the oldest of 7 kids. So he must probably felt like adults disappointed him and rejected him. And therefore, the only person that could stick up for him or save him or look out for him is him. And talking about driven model is recognizing when you're an adult, I'm safe, I have everything I need, I have a house, I have food, I have shelter. I don't need to come out of that combative place, right? And he never came out of it. So the people that are ego, that I watch people that I know that go on ego trips, it's they believe that everybody is their enemy. And if I am the highest, then nobody can get me. If I exert the most power, then nobody can get to me, right? So they play God.
I want you to talk to your rabbi about something,
Okay.
about sending the goats into the desert. Are you familiar with scapegoating?
A little bit, only since I've started reading Ted Bradshaw and those things. But from a Torah perspective, where was the scapegoat?
The sacrifice.
Yeah,
Judaism is based completely on it, and that you make atonement,
right,
atoning, and so you are compensating for our impurities by putting our impurities on an innocent animal.
right, yes,
Then they hold the negative energy.
right.
We send them out, that negative away from us. And so scapegoating is actually is going in sheep wolves, because I believe it's a very
Oh, you're saying something very powerful right now because it's Ted Bradshaw talks about, and my coach Ken Richardson talks about the family dynamics and which child, the scapegoat acts out.
Here's the classic Bradshaw. Here's the collective ideal. Here's all the people in the family system that are very similar, hardworking, all college educated, whatever little labels you want to put on it. But then
Right.
you have a collective shadow too.
And that they pick one child to be the scapegoat, and that's how everybody feels
They
better.
pick one person to shadow cast.
Yes,
If you were like us, then we wouldn't feel all of this pain.
it's the
It's like
deflection.
it's literally a projection of our pain on someone else.
Shame.
I always joke, shame. That's why I always joke, I love me my scapegoats. Because it's every scapegoat, and this is going directly in the book. I am a scapegoat. I work 90% of the people that come into my world are the scapegoats. Drivens are often the scapegoat in society. Because I know I'm up, but I'm not as up as you think I am.
So the scapegoats are the only ones that are willing to look inward.
They have to look inward. They have to. Some of them don't.
Right. I was gonna say, like, I was my dad's scapegoat. My dad most probably was his dad's scapegoat, but my dad never looked inward. And that's where he most probably became sadist or manic or whatever you want to call him.
And you could have chosen to not look inward. You could have been the victim, your dad, and I'm sure you had moments where you were really pissed. But we have to, because our shadows that they're projecting on us are so much bigger than we can even own. You can't own, and that's one of the things that I talk about is owning your own shadow. That's the path out of codependency. But we have to, because it is that statement. You knew that you were a pain in the ass.
Right.
But I'm not as big as up as my dad thinks I am. And so that immediately discerns us from others. You have your inner world that you're projecting on me. I have my own inner world. I've got my own issues, trust me.
It's fascinating what you're saying because there is let's say 20% of humanity, right, are the people that technically share 3 out of 4 things that driven have. And this is one more thing that a driven has, which is people like my mom who never looked inward. She has all the symptoms of a driven. She's a narcissist. Nothing is ever good enough. A lot of shame, but she never looked inwards because she always projected.
And that creates an opportunity for you. And this is why it's an old joke about when you hold a mirror up to a narcissist, hold it way out to the side. So learning how to actually own your own shadow, but not blame any of it on her.
Right. She called me and she said, I guess I'm too busy for you. I'm not your client, whatever. She left me such a message.
You know the Al-Anon handshake and then the Al-Anon Absolute. I mean, it is.
So for a change, I called her back and I was like, Ma, of course you're so important to me. You know what I'm busy with? I'm busy moving. And I would have loved a mother that would help me move. I would have loved a mother that would come down, pack my boxes for me. And she's like, oh, I know I can't do that for you. Okay, bye, I gotta go.
My mother, on the other hand, is someone you do not ever invite over for moving because she's the one more load and let's hang the pictures anyway, even though it's 11 o'clock at night. No, get out of my house.
She's never
She's
gonna
walking
come.
around with a hammer.
She never lifted a finger in her life. She has 16 kids. All of us did all the heavy work.
Wow,
She would have never come. She would have never lifted a finger. She needs to feel needed. And the minute I tell her I need her, she runs away. Can't show up.
you just said it.
Right.
Yeah, the helplessness in that victim, man. That is such a ugh.
I realize you have to play victim with her. If not, you're gonna get eaten up alive. Because if I have a bigger house now, I built my house and I made a like a wheelchair accessible room. And from the first moment, I said, Ma, I made a room special for you. You know, you're gonna get old and I want you to be able to come to me. Now I could have a big house because I'm so great and I'm doing such a good deed and I'm gonna host people. But if I would have had a big house and it wouldn't include her, I would have gotten eaten up like a shark.
Is the nuance of intention, and that is a moral, characterological statement of really, I see your soul.
Right.
If I don't see your soul, then it's all flat behavior. A good daughter builds a room for mom in her house.
Right.
Is she gonna, all right, check, you're good.
Exactly. So I've learned not to write. I used to try so hard when I was younger to be moral and righteous and right the wrong. And instead I just like give her the narrative that she wants to hear so I can be left alone.
Taught that to my older brother David, and he light bulb over Marblehead. He and my father used to just fight about nuance.
Right.
My father is not frugal. He's the cheapest man you've ever met, like pathological. I mean, he truly gonna unplug the refrigerator at night. So I'm not kidding you.
That sounds pretty similar to my dad.
Crazy. I mean, the guy's worth 50, 60 million bucks and
Oh, wow.
can't, oh yeah, no, he can't enjoy a $10 dinner.
Wow.
And my brother used to take, but from that place, it feels like my father is judging you about every dime you spend.
Right.
And what the hell does he have a right to actually put on? And it's like, dude, he's not doing that. He only knows one script. And if he's not living by that script, it scares him. Acknowledge his fear, tell him it's okay. And then I see that's scary.
Did he assert power with that?
Well, it's a power to validate himself.
No.
You must validate my narrative. Otherwise, I'm living by something that doesn't make me feel safe. And oh my God, you're not living by it. And
So
it just
feels stupid.
Feels stupid, feels shame, feels like he's doing something wrong. And that's intolerable to him because that pit of a well of shame is so big.
Let's say you guys had a trip in school and everybody had to bring $40. Would he not give you the money?
He would test you with the money.
Yeah, it sounds like my dad.
We reconciled it, thank God. He had a book, every single dime since the age of 18 for all four of his sons that had spent, and I mean to the penny.
No way.
To the penny. And that was all going to be reconciled when I die and all of this stuff. And thank God, because of my brother's younger wife. My brother married a she's Jewish. And I personally love her, but she just was a ball buster and very concerned about how the trust would be divided. And I told my dad, this is going to be a pain in the ass, man. You better. And so he did the distributions and it was all completely corrected.
Wow, that's fascinating that he was able. I always say that it's a separate blessing for these people to be able to correct their life when they are alive. My father did not get the privilege to do that. He got sick. He didn't make up with me. He didn't divide his money. He didn't create nothing. Like, the guy's alive, but he's dead. And it's pathetic. But he kind of most probably wanted it that way because he was so afraid of taking ownership and saying, you get this, you get this, you get that. So it's the ultimate form of selfishness to take yourself out of the picture and say, F you, everybody figure it out. Because that's what he always did.
Yeah, my father has done, because I got sober 38 years ago, and forced him into Al-Anon and so he was forced to look at himself. He hasn't drank it longer than me. I mean, he hasn't drank in 40 years either. He quit drinking, he does the best he can to look at himself.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's 87 years old, and he's softened dramatically. But the more I've actually been able to hold my own shadow and present it to him in a way where he doesn't need to take responsibility for it, he's actually able to show up in a very different way. But God forbid somebody put a shadow on him. Holy me.
So what's your question about scapegoating?
What is the modern day equivalent? And I have studied Vedic Christianity. What the Catholics did in 312 AD is criminal.
First of all, as you were saying it, I have this huge awareness that this is most probably how the toxic masculinity, pedagogy, everything happened, because we're designed to scapegoat, so we took it on to people. Really, from a religious perspective, every year before the New Year's, we take a chicken, some people take a fish, a chicken, or money, and swing it around our head. We say a prayer, and our sins goes into that. We go to the water and we shake out our pockets and we say that the fish in the water should take our sins. And there's just prayer. We say asking for atonement, prayer, and giving charity. So those are the three things that we do in modern day times. That's why there's so much charity in our world, maybe. Whenever anybody has a crisis, like when I wasn't feeling well and I had these 2 goiters on my throat. So the rabbi was, make sure you always have fresh challah. So like I bake once in 3 weeks, so like that I have, and give charity. And we ask God that in that merit, we should get healed. Whatever was destined for us goes, that's what I understand. But I'll ask him about that concept.
Yeah, and how is this a fundamental? How are we going to deal with it as a modern culture?
I think Judaism is way more gentle than we think it is, Like God it's like you just say prayer, you're fine. Like everybody takes it so seriously. It's like we swing that chicken. I hate doing it with chickens. I did it with money last year. It's like God promises you over and over and over. You're getting a clean slate. You're getting a clean slate. Like just show me that you want. That's it.
Yeah, it's an old as long as you put God first, you can do anything.
Yeah, and it's like every prayer, 90% of it is you're our Father, you're full of mercy. Like we talk about judgment so little. Like if you look in a prayer book, the judgment is this much. Everything else is this much.
So the rabbi's advice to someone like your father or your mother?
Well, my rabbi told me when my father got sick, he said it's the greatest blessing for me that my father got sick. Because he said the guy could have been strong and you could have been terrified of him and then he would just drop dead. You got to see God disarming somebody. And that, like, you must have merited to be able to witness God taking somebody that's so scary and powerful. And like when I stand in front of my dad these days, I'm like, you can't hurt me.
Have that authority. So your father does what with his shame now?
I think that's why he got so sick. He has Parkinson's and dementia. He's basically he's living on life support. He's not reactive. He's nothing. I think he selectively became mute very early on in the process because of his ego, and he would stutter, so he didn't want to not say things perfectly. So he stopped talking very, very early on. And then I would notice, like, if my husband would walk in, he would light up. If I would walk in, he got very mad. His whole body got very tense. It was fascinating to watch.
His trauma just stuck in that loop, and now he's dementia. He's lost the capacity to actually have a narrative.
Yeah, isn't it sad?
Does he laugh?
Nothing, zero reaction. And it's like this whole thing, like for years, I used to blame my father for 90% and my mom 10. He got sick. I got to see who my mother truly is. Like she acts so abusively to him. Like she'll make him sit up and dress him to the T because maybe the neighbors will see. And he has to go to synagogue. It's a fascinating. I never saw this narcissism. Like it was always like you couldn't tell like which one is the crazy one. Because like we have 2 crazy parents. It's like, okay, but who's really crazy? Maybe one is the victim. And then now I'm like, they're equally nuts,
Does your mom show any signs of softness to him?
Nothing. It's all about her. Every time to talk on the phone to her, she's really a widow, but she's not. And she says, she like shakes him. She says, I have to do that. So he should wake up and he should be alive. Like, if you want to study somebody, come study my mom. Most people do not believe it until they see it.
How do they interact with does your grandkids light your dad up? Does he have any kind of emotional?
He has some kind of emotional reaction when some kids walk into the room, some grandkid.
Mom lights up with grandkids?
Oh, what I was gonna say is the most fascinating thing is that they were both driven. So that's why I'm saying, like, all the markers, let's say you have 4 markers of being driven, they've got 3 out of 4. The only one they don't have is being able to look internally.
They have an external locus of control, and that's across the board in all areas of their life. They have no insight. That's rare.
No insight. My mom, zero, zero, zero insight. I've never seen somebody so not in touch with reality. But it's also when you create an environment that allows you to live that way. I divorced something she didn't like, and she told my friend, how could I make that people don't know she's my daughter? So she will alter reality to fit her narrative. She sees a picture of herself and she's like, oh no, that's not me. It wasn't me. I wasn't so close to the wall.
Wild.
Because there's controversy if you let her go to the Western world or not. So some of her sons that she like admires wouldn't go. So how do you, if you want to be like, she wants to attach herself to whoever is the highest, most holiest. If she says she was at the Western Wall, then she is lesbian, right? But she wants to go. So she goes. And then when she sees a picture, she's like, oh no, I wasn't that close. That's not that close. So it's like that. When I saw that, I was like, oh wow, that's why I'm so effed up, because everything that ever happened didn't really happen. And you think it happened, but it really didn't happen. And the story gets changed.
All of your siblings have insight?
By now, 90%. I have one brother that's really sick and a narcissist himself. So,
But the scapegoating in the mom's realm, dad's the scapegoat now, and it's blamed for her miserable life.
yeah, and he was the scapegoat always. The fascinating part to me is he was the scapegoat to her, but he wasn't adult enough to take responsibility for his life and either protect the kids, like do something about it. I find it double dysfunctional when an adult says, sorry, I can't protect you. But when I went with my kid on that ropes, I had that moment. My son made it to the other side. I was here at extreme fear, and I looked at myself and I said, wow, this is most probably where my father was. He had that moment of saying, F you, figure it out, or crossing the bridge. And I made a conscious decision. My biggest fear was falling and being embarrassed. That was my 100% biggest fear. And I said, well, your mom, just gonna do what you gotta do, like, and cross over the bridge.
You had the capacity to step out of your emotional truth and see an alternative reality.
Maybe, but it's also accountability. You talk a lot about accountability, right?
Mhm.
So is accountability a marker of somebody that's driven, or is it a result of healing?
Locus of control, and what causes internal locus of control, it's not fixed, it is changeable. But the nurturing environment is usually somewhere, it's letting your 3-month-old, 4-month-old, 10-month-old, 14-month-old, 36-month-old explore in a safe way in their environment and have a playful, safe childhood.
Right.
Or early trauma can really knock that for a loop. My ex, Deanna, has no insight. I mean, she had no capacity to own her truth. It was just the scaffolding wasn't built there.
Saying like when a child gets close to the staircase and like feels it, and it's like, oh, it's going down. Do I go? Do I not? And they fall that first time. They have to go through that, right?
Right. But it is I can go explore what's on the coffee table and not get screamed at that I'm terrified and doing something wrong.
Right.
I can play with that, but if there's something dangerous, mom comes and pulls it out of your way.
Right.
Because she still wants you to explore and wants you to actually interact with that environment.
Right.
And in that way, you're developing curiosity over an emotional truth.
The last time
My emotional truth is too dangerous.
it loops back to where we left off when we recorded, which is I believe that the key to healthy development is reserving your reactions, right? Neutralizing reactions. I'm a huge believer on that. My kids could fall and nobody, it's like, oh, you fell? Okay, you're okay. And where I watch other people go, oh my gosh, you know?
So briefly mentioned in my book, but it's really about attachment. So tell you the story yet? My daughter, eldest daughter, was 2. Her sister was just about to be born in that February. So she turned 2, and she was outside butt naked playing in the water table. Big sun hat. Ex-wife was inside prego with kid number 2, super hormonal. Daughter lets out a blood-curdling scream outside. What happens to my wife's central nervous system?
Right.
They go running. She goes running towards my daughter. They make eye contact. The mirror neurons in my daughter's body register that mom's freaking out.
Right.
Because I'm freaking out, you're freaking out. That means you care about me and you're coming towards me. And so the huge amount of messages there.
But it also gives you permission to be scared.
And my wife's central nervous system is freaking out, but her neocortex, her problem solver, is much bigger than a 2-year-old's. So she's looking for the bee sting, looking for the, haircut, looking for the danger, and literally sees my 2-year-old running from her poop as it's falling out of her rear. True story. What happens to my wife's central nervous system when she realizes what's going on is the laughter, and complete change in physiology. Most importantly, she puts her hands up. Come here, sweetie.
Right.
What happens to my daughter's central nervous system is from terror and frozen to big old crocodile tears. And that is the way my daughter learns to not be scared of poop.
Right. It's co-regulate.
Well, it's co-regulation, but that's called a mirroring exchange. My wife is something called a trusted mirror, meaning that if I see you and you see me and we're both freaking out, I can tell you what I'm freaking out about, and you're going to reality check it for me and say, no, you're running from your own poop.
Right.
But it's in that first moment of actually joining in the terror, somebody else's central nervous system just goes, oh shit, boom, and then you go, really? Boom. And mirrors go bad all the time. Oh my God, you're everywhere. And what the heck? Right? And it's easy to imagine how that could have happened. And then what my daughter's, every time she goes poop, she doesn't want to let it go. And then
right. So then there's also the frozen parents that are like very frozen. So I guess coming from a place where people were overreactive, for me, it's like, oh, you hurt yourself. Like I don't go past that because I can't, So yes, I hear that whole mirroring thing.
And so if you don't have that, which is my guess is your mom and dad didn't have that. My mom and dad did not have that.
No, they went whack.
And so, oh, you're fine. Any emotional dysregulation, stop it, you're fine.
No, you weren't fine. It's your fault. My sister broke her arm and my father threatened her that the next time she breaks his arm, he's not taking her to the hospital.
So you can't make that shit up, but he was serious.
No, but not only that, I was responsible as a 5-year-old. All this came up in this NET therapy that I do. So sometimes it comes up. So I was a 5-year-old and I was responsible to go pick up my 3-year-old sister from the neighbor and she fell. So it was my fault. So I got a beating that my sister broke her arm.
Crazy.
Believe me.
This is
I don't know how this is helpful to you because this became a vent session instead of driven.
no. It's helping you understand really, kind of the inner workings, and then you're putting it into regular language where I'm too wordy. Good, and you're asking the right questions. I mean, you really are getting this.
For me, it was important to understand the difference between, I think it's fair to say maybe 20% of the world has 3 out of 4 markers of driven, but then who are the true driven? And I think what we got clarity on today is that there's that piece of looking inward and accountability. So if we would have
which I don't, you think about Fauci or you think about the true, driven narcissists.
Exactly.
And I don't think do you think he really knows what he's doing? I don't know.
I think he's running from his shadow so far down the deep end. Those are the power trips that we're talking about.
And he's intoxicated in his own narrative.
Right. So if I had to say, It's the D4 gene, it's trauma, it's scapegoating, and then there's accountability.
And owning just your own shadow. And that discernment is what the codependency is. You're owning your husband's shadow for him because your father trained you to do that.
Right.
And breaking those patterns is about owning your own shadow, not forcing your husband to own his shadow, but to become curious about what is his part in it.
What I'm seeing is there are two types of driven. There are those that have more narcissistic tendencies, and then there are the ones that have more codependent tendencies.
You got it.
Yeah.
You're looking at me like I have two heads.
No, like, yeah, so whatever I thought was right was right. You know, like when I reached out to you the first time and I had that theory and I thought I was crazy, and I'm like, oh, I'm not that crazy.
Keep thinking, start
Okay.
writing about how does that men have a tendency, and I'll make a blanket statement, to actually own their wife's shadow way too much.
I'm gonna have to survey that. I could see that. I want to come up with a term called reverse narcissism. And that's the women that act like victims and therefore deflect everything.
But that's it's a self disorder. They have a lack of self, small s self. That's
Right.
a very Jungian statement. You have to first complete building the self to kill the self.
Right.
Otherwise, you're trying to kill something that isn't complete. Doesn't make sense.
Right.
And keep, how does this apply to food? Ask your rabbi about scapegoating. And is food really your problem? Is that, or are you just scapegoating it? Think about that. So, gotta go.
Okay. There's a lot to think of. I'll text you.
All right.